When a baby is born, right away the mother and father have a decision they have to make. Because within a matter of days, or maybe within a matter of hours, they need to decide what name to give their child. And whether parents realize it or not, the name they choose to give their child can have a major impact on the rest of that child's life. For instance, researchers have found that if a child is given a name where the initials spell out some kind of a positive word, like if a child was named William Isaac Nelson, where the initials are W-I-N, Win. On average, people who are given names who have initials that spell out a positive word like that end up living about 4.5 years longer than people whose initials do not spell out a word. If instead the parents choose to give their child a name where the initials spell out a less than favorable word, like if a child was named Paul Ignatius Gordon, P-I-G, or Pig, on average, people who are given names like that end up living about 3 years less than people whose initials do not spell out a word. Every day we're confronted with choices that we have to make. And very often the choices we make have a major impact on ourselves and on the people around us. But while we often try to put off making some of those decisions, God wants us to see that when it comes time to deciding whether we're going to decide to do what God wants us to do or not, those kinds of decisions are urgent. Those are the kinds of decisions where waiting around and delaying are not an option. That's exactly what we see here in this story that we just heard from the Acts of the Apostles. You see, Philip was sort of an officer in the early church. You might call him a deacon, someone who had been appointed to care for the poor and hungry people in and around Jerusalem. But it seems that one day Philip sensed that God was talking to him and telling him to go and stand out along the road that led to the city of Gaza. The thing is, at that time, there were 2 roads that led to Gaza. There was the main road that everyone took, that led west out of Jerusalem and then south along the Mediterranean Sea. And there was the other road, the one that hardly anyone traveled on, because it was kind of a back roads, bumpy sort of trail through the desert. But Philip sensed that God was telling him to go out and stand alongside that second road, that road that hardly anyone ever used. Yet even though it didn't make a lot of sense to Philip to do that, to go out and stand in the middle of nowhere all by himself, he figured that if that was something that God wanted him to do, then it was urgent. And so right away, without any hesitation, Philip got up and went out and stood alongside that desert road. Well, after standing there for some time, Philip noticed some dust being kicked up in the distance. And after a while, he could see what it was. It was a chariot headed his way. That was nice, he thought. At least that would be something to break up the monotony of standing out there, to be able to see a chariot pass by. But why, Philip wondered, why did God want him to be standing out there in the middle of the desert like that? Was it just so he could see this big, fancy chariot pass by? But as the chariot got closer, Philip sensed that God was talking to him again, this time telling him to go up to the chariot. And again, since Philip believed that this was something that God wanted him to do, he figured that it was urgent. And so Philip didn't just start walking in the direction of that chariot. No, Philip began to run. And as he got closer, he could see that the man in the chariot was reading a part of the Bible. And so Philip called out to him and said, "Hey, do you understand what you're reading?" But the man replied, "How can I? How can I understand unless there's someone to guide me? And where am I going to find someone to help me understand the Bible way out here in the middle of the desert?" And so Philip got into the chariot with him. And as they rode along, Philip helped the man understand what he was reading. And he began to tell him about the good news of Jesus. And after a while, when that man began to realize just how good the good news of Jesus really is, that man felt a sense of urgency. He ordered his chariot to stop. And without wanting there to be any delay, he begged Philip to baptize him right then and there. And that is what Philip did. What are the urgent things that God wants us to be doing? The title for today's sermon, "The Fierce Urgency of Now," comes from a part of Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech. In that speech, King talks about how there are times in our lives where God wants us to make a decision and act. How there are times in our lives when just thinking and pondering and waiting around aren't an option. Because there are things that God wants us to be doing. And God wants us to realize that those are urgent things. What are the urgent things that God wants us to be doing? Especially on Mother's Day. One of the things I believe that God wants us to sense the urgency of is the responsibility that mothers and all of us have toward the children of our world.